Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, the author of The Captivating Public Speaker, Peter George.
When you develop presentations, how much thought do you give to being persuasive? Any? Well, you should, because just about every time you deliver a presentation, you're attempting to persuade someone into buying what you're selling. Whether it's a product or service, or an idea, belief, proposition, or other concept. So if you want to be more persuasive when speaking, listen in as my guest Bryan Rutberg explains how you can make this a reality. Bryan is the founder of 3C Communications and is a business communication expert who helps leaders in their organizations figure out what they're trying to say and then say it well. He has helped create TED Talks and South by Southwest presentations and works with business and nonprofit professionals to communicate clearly, achieve their business objectives, and get more of what they want. Here's my conversation with Bryan Rutberg. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Peter, good to be here with you. I've been looking forward to this.
Bryan, you say that if my listeners want to be more persuasive, then they should do 3 things before their presentations. What are these 3 things?
Some people come to being coaches of speakers and helpers of speakers more from the theatrical slide, and it's about the stagecraft and all of that. And some of us come to working with speakers from the more corporate side. And that's certainly my background, 20-year corporate career and speechwriter for executives and things like that. And that means that I was always in a position where I was helping people persuade people about things. It's not just about getting an idea out of your head and propagating it out there, although that's an element of it. You're generally looking to make a persuasive case and get someone to say yes to something. And I found that working with the executives I supported, the things that helped them the most were, first, you got to think about the audience. Who's in it? And yes, you can play the whole demographic game, and that's important. Am I speaking to more men, more women? Are they a little older, a little younger? But really, it comes down to thinking about where you're finding that audience intellectually. Are they coming into the conversation with me or against me? Or if you're speaking to a smallish group, knowing who in the room is more inclined to follow your lead and who's more inclined to push back and who's got the power in the room. So bottom line, think about your audience. If you don't do that and you just think about what you want to say, you're missing out on the opportunity to make a connection. The second thing is, now think about if you know where your audience is intellectually, whether that's for you, against you, whether they're experts or they're lay people, whether they speak the same professional language as you, or you've got to go a little slower and bring them up by explaining, all the points along the way. Where do you want to get them by the time you're done speaking with them? If they're against, perhaps you want to get them for. If they're favoring something you're opposing, maybe you want to get them to the other side. You want to maybe induce some fear, something like that. But intellectually and emotionally, where do you want to get them? This is before you write down a word of your presentation or try and make a slide. And then the last thing is, what are you going to ask for, right? In a business context, if you're not thinking about the go-do, the request you're going to make, whether it's call now, operators are standing by, or vote for me, or let me have the additional staff to get this job done, or the additional budget to get this job done. If you're not thinking about your end game, you're just throwing information out there and there's no insight attached to it. The last thing I'd add, your bonus part is, once you've thought about all that, do think about you and how you want these people to see you. Because in most business relationships and most business contexts, you are putting your moment, this particular moment, in a series across time, and you're building a relationship. So I could bully you into doing something, but how are you going to feel afterwards? And is it going to be building the relationship? So thinking about how you're going to come across and taking pains to make sure you're making a human connection in addition to achieving the goal that you're after.
I've been smiling as you've been listing these things because it's very much in alignment with what I say.
Good. Yeah, well, those of us who are smart and have been doing this for a while, we tend to end up at the same place because we know what works.
It's funny how that happens.
Right?
Is any one of these more important than the others?
I don't know about him, one being more important than the others, but one needs to precede all of them. There's a reason I listed them in that order. Think about your audience first, because the presentation that you're going to prepare, if you're a doctor for a group of other doctors, is different than what you're going to prepare if you're a doctor who is speaking to lay people. One of my favorite projects from a while ago, in part because of how it played to my heart, not just my intellect, I worked with cancer researchers. Very technical, inclined to give you the ins and outs of what was going on in the beakers and the bottles and the Bunsen burners or whatever it is cancer researchers are working with. I don't think it's really beakers, bottles, and Bunsen burners. But my client, the ones who were paying me to work with the cancer researchers, was the fundraising arm of the Cancer Research Center. And their explicit ask was, help us help our researchers talk with our donors better. And suddenly it became not about the beakers, bottles, and Bunsen burners. It became about the lives that were being saved and what those lives were able to go on to do. The story became about the mother who was able to watch her son get married, or the grandmother who was able to watch her granddaughter walk across the stage and receive her diploma. And to take cancer researchers who wouldn't have necessarily thought about the audience and remember, these are not people who are going to get it if you just come in at a high scientific level. So think about the audience first. After that, everything flows more easily.
That's a great point. I have a client who's a research scientist, and when he's speaking to other scientists, he uses particular language. Yet when he speaks to laymen, he chooses a different language that will resonate with them.
As it should be.
Has to be.
Yeah, it is the way to be persuasive and make a human connection. If I come in talking about all of the science to a non-scientist, or I'm an attorney who is trying to get people up to speed on some arcane portion of tax law or guardianship law or something like that, you need to figure out, am I talking to other experts, or am I explaining this to a bunch of people who don't have the same background, knowledge, specialized language that I do?
Warren Buffett has said that when he's developing his communications, he keeps his sister in mind. Now, she was educated, but she's not a business person. His point is that if she can't understand it, then maybe others won't understand it either. He wants to make his communications easily understood and processed.
Well, and the corollary for this, or in addition to this, is even just working with executives in business who are talking to audiences of customers is one thing, but even when they're talking to their own team. When I was writing for a corporate VP at Microsoft, when I was still in my corporate years, she could talk to her team of tens of thousands around the globe who were responsible for Microsoft's customer support function, but they lacked they had the specialized knowledge, they lacked the context she had. And our consistent messaging goal was help people who see a very narrow swath of the universe see the wider context. And sometimes that's what you've got to do. These people understand my language. I can use the shorthand and the 3-letter acronyms with them, but I have to make them see beyond the part of the particular bell curve they happen to be on to see the whole picture that I see, because I'm the exec and I'm trying to drive everybody collectively down a particular path.
When talking about being persuasive, might some people mistakenly believe that's being manipulative?
Yeah. When I work with sensitive souls, and I'm one of them, the immediate thought that tends to go through the head is, there is a continuum that goes from persuasive to manipulative to bullying. And being persuasive is what we as professionals, and most of my clients are in the world of business or at least nonprofit, we're paid to have a point of view. We're in front of that room, whether that's leading a sales meeting or an update to the board or talking with thousands of customers in an auditorium. We're paid to educate and move people down a path towards some eventual goal. I think we all need to check in with our moral centers and figure out, am I supporting something that I'm going to feel good and be able to look at myself in the mirror about? But I don't think we need to apologize for saying, right now, I don't have money for this project and I'm trying to get money for this project because, and this is important for thinking about what the presentation is going to look like, if I drive the outcome I want to drive, everybody wins. So you've got to pair up your desire to move people towards a different place than they are now. You've got to put that in the context of, because I've got a good reason for doing so. It's the difference between I'm delivering a bunch of information to you, do with it what you will, and saying, I've looked at all this information and I want to walk you through a process where you understand my thought process and you decide to hit me with more questions so I can clarify, or just to buy in. You're still part of a dialogue, but for that moment, you own the conversation. It's yours, and only you can give away the power to others to start questioning you and testing your expertise.
When our listeners are giving a persuasive presentation, how could they know that it's working?
It's easier in person, but even on an electronic connection, you can look for the visual cues, the heads nodding up and down, the eyebrows going up, the person who's smiling rather than pursing their lips or even frowning. I regularly check in with my audiences when I'm doing virtual or in person. We're going to say, I see heads going up and down. I know you're with me. You reinforce that through your connection with the audience. But that's how when I'm on stage, know that I've got the audience believing along with me. You can also, and this works nicely in presentations to decision-making groups, whether it's your boss and his or her peers, or whether it's to a sales call, or whether it's in a sales call. Let me just get a quick show of hands. Everybody following me? Are we all on the same page? Can I move on? And it's that asking for permission, or quick show of hands. If you feel like you're with me and you even may have a sense of where I'm going, let me see your hand in the air for just a moment. And while our listeners are listening here physically, I've got a hand in the air. So as a presenter, I'm showing that it's okay to follow my lead and put a hand in the air. So it's the body language, and it's doing a human thing and asking, are we connected here? Do you get this? Let me know if you've got any concerns at this moment, or let's make sure we save them for the end.
That's a great engagement technique.
Thanks. I love what I do. I love what I do. Connecting with people. My two strengths through all of my career have been clear, cogent communicator and builder of relationships, whether I was getting two companies to see eye to eye and collaborate on research and advertising and marketing and executive connection and obviously selling together, or whether it was just walking down the hall when I was in a role and getting to know the other people on the hall and what they do, and then knowing I had a network that I could go to for resources and knowledge as I was building stories out for the executives I was working for. If I can help people build great connection, person to person, organization to organization, and use the tools that I'm good at, good conversation, good communication, I feel like over the 10 years since I left the corporate world, my true self has come into much greater alignment with my business self. That's a heck of a good feeling.
Have you heard what noted speakers and readers are saying about Peter's book, The Captivating Public Speaker? The single most helpful speaking resource I've ever encountered. A framework that elevates you to a superb speaker. a system that is straightforward and guaranteed to improve your public speaking skills. After this episode, please use the link in the show notes to check out The Captivating Public Speaker on Amazon. Now, back to Peter and his guest.
And you've mentioned the corporate world a few times, but
Yeah.
this isn't restricted to just the business environment, right?
Not at all. And those tend to be the people who hire me because those are the networks that I'm comfortable with and where I'm best known. But it works the same if you're leading a nonprofit. It works the same if you are a volunteer at your kid's school or a church or synagogue. It works the same way. Honestly, good communication is a boon. We were talking before we went on air and started recording here. We each mentioned our spouses. I get the feeling we've both been with our spouses for a while. Good relationship skills with spouses, with kids, with parents is enhanced by being able to communicate in the right way. And all of these principles that we're going through, think about what's going through your audience's head. Think about your goal for the conversation. Think about how they're going to receive information and how careful you need to be when you're trying to take someone down a particular path and not appear manipulative. It's precisely the same in all elements.
Do you have a story of when these principles, these techniques really worked?
I'm going to give a few in a couple of different contexts. One of the for-profit companies I work with is a software vendor, and their software is for people who are running nonprofits. So there's this overlap between worlds. We're a for-profit technology company who makes technology that helps nonprofits serve their communities, fundraise, put on programs, things like that. Each year pre-COVID, this software company put on a big user conference. In subsequent years, they've done some number of online events around the introduction of new technology and sort of an annual update of, hey, here's what we see as happening in the world of nonprofits. Here's how we're responding to it with our technology. And year after year, as I encountered the product managers and product marketers, they had spent the prior year where their heads should be in the product. And the habit that we annually went about breaking was get out of the habit of thinking about the product, and now let's think about what it does. And watching the light bulb go off with folks that I was working with, each time I was working with someone who was new to the team as opposed to someone who could pick up kind of where we had left off the year before. Let's not talk about what the technology does. Let's talk about what the user of technology does. Let's talk about how the individual who works for the nonprofit, who is responsible for putting together the marketing program or the peer-to-peer fundraising program and expressing it in software, with a web page, is going to do that. And then taking them one step beyond, let's don't put you in the position of talking about how you make it easier for that person to move the right boxes on screen or write the right fundraising copy. Let's talk about how they view their work through their mission. Maybe they're curing cancer. Maybe they're saving a wetland. Maybe they're finding forever homes for puppies or children. Maybe they're doing something worthwhile. They believe strongly in their mission. That's why they went into the world of nonprofits. And suddenly, connecting the product marketer who's thinking like a technologist, thinking about, if I've done my job right, we are advancing the ball on saving the climate or saving the whales or saving the cancer victims. That can get very powerful. There was the one story of working with a product marketer who, as we went down this string of, what does your technology do? How does it do it? How does it help that person do their job? How does it help that person and their organization fulfill their mission? when she started thinking about it at a deeper level and realized this nonprofit that I've got in mind that I am helping could be the one that helped my mom when she was going through breast cancer, you can imagine the power of that. So there's my story. It was working with the woman whose mom had been through breast cancer and who had been helped by nonprofits, suddenly thinking about her work in the context of, I'm helping these people fulfill their mission.
That's a long, long way from, I have to do a presentation.
Yeah. It becomes a privilege, not a chore.
Exactly. Now, do you have one on the other end where maybe things didn't go so well?
Fortunately, those are harder to think of. I can point the blame squarely at myself and think about reacting, and I use the word reacting advisedly, reacting rather than responding, and being short with, I used to say the only 4 people on the planet who could make me raise my voice were my parents and my children. And my kids are now adults, and we have a terrific relationship, and I try to be mindful in all of my communications. And I was recently down visiting my mom and dad, who are in the process of moving out of their home of the last 25 years and into a retirement community. And rather than tell stories on clients of mine, my story is I do a less good job than I would like to have consistently thinking about my parents and their needs and their perspectives when I'm put into the position that's a little unusual. Well, that's unusual, but many of us sandwich generation folks are getting comfortable with, or at least dealing with, of being the advice giver and the counselor. And I start getting much too directive. And what happens when someone starts bossing you around, especially the person who you used to change diapers for, you get your back up. So when it doesn't go so well, it's because I forget the first principle of think about who's in your audience. And that tends to happen more in family situations when you're rushed and you assume they should just follow my lead because they trust me, as opposed to continually and consistently trying to build that trust.
It requires us to stop for a minute and think, where are they? Where do you want them to be?
It's about reacting, not reacting, but responding. As you say, take that beat and think about it, which is circle back to public speaking. Great coaching for handling Q&A. Oh, I know the answer to that. Let me just rush into it, as opposed to taking that moment, thinking about the question behind the question, maybe asking a clarifying question and giving yourself a chance to organize your thoughts, but also making sure that your assumptions are correct before you start flapping your lips. Use your brain before you engage your mouth.
Not to go off on a different topic here, but bringing up Q&A. Do you think a lot of us want to answer Q&A right away? We hear the question and boom, we're on it, to show our expertise and our capabilities and that we know what we're talking about?
I've found that differs person to person, and it has a lot to do with extroversion versus introversion, has a lot to do with size of the ego, and here I'm making some judgments on the people that I work with, but I think the inclination is much greater to dive right into an answer when you're literally selling something, when you're proposing a commercial transaction rather than just advancing a conversation. Those of us who have carried a bag and sold for a living tend to feel the pressure of wanting to get that sale made. We're chasing the high, if you will, and that can lead to ill-advised quick responses rather than, and making assumptions about what the person's really asking without checking in with them. I think the smart presenter knows what their strategy is going to be before they take to the front of the room. Do I want to invite questions throughout the course of my presentation? Or am I in a position where I want to batch all Q&A to the end? And having made that important decision and built in an enforcement mechanism, or at least an educational mechanism at the start, stick to it. But regardless of when questions come at you, take that beat, take a breath, think for a moment, potentially think of a quality clarifying question, and then and only then begin to answer. I'd also point out you don't need to give the Encyclopedia Britannica version of the answer. Give the short version and say, this is an endlessly fascinating discussion. It can go deep. If you want to take it deeper, let's take this offline.
Smart thing to do, because even the person who asked the question often doesn't want a terribly involved answer.
Well, and how often have any of us, out of enthusiasm, youth, naivete, for whatever reason, as the saying goes, broken ourselves into jail? One of the greatest lessons I learned when I was early in my career and was professionally in a big corporate environment, selling for the first time, a boss whom I was trying to persuade about something stopped me. Once he had said, yes, go ahead, and I continued to offer reasons why it was just so smart for him to have said yes, he said, Rutberg, don't sell past the close. And that bit of, you can only get yourself in trouble if you subsequently raise something that makes someone think twice about the answer they've just given. So Q&A is one of those areas where a little less information is really better than a lot more information. People could always ask for more, but you as a question answerer need to put your answer into the context of some point you're actually trying to make, instead of just accepting the framing of the questioner or going down a rabbit hole that's too deep because it takes you away from your main thesis, your central desire for the communication.
Bryan, you've helped my listeners know how they can be more persuasive. Where can they learn more about you and the services you provide?
Thank you. Yeah, my company is 3C Communications, the number 3 and the letter C. When I first started the company, I told people it stood for you've got to create your message, you've got to communicate it out, but mostly you have to build a connection with your audience. It has subsequently been offered as we're the customer connection company, because so much of the work I do goes beyond just communication to finding other ways, programs, listening opportunities to really hear your customers and build that relationship. But either way, 3ccoms.com gets you to my website. You can read my bio. You can see the questions that I like to ask to help people become better communicators and better at building relationships. And of course, Bryan with a Y, Rutberg, find me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. I'll have those in the notes. Bryan, thank you so much for being here today.
Peter, what an absolute pleasure to connect with you, to find a fellow communicator from across the country who has seen some of the same things I've seen and come to some of the same conclusions. It's pretty cool.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to tune in again for a conversation with another public speaking expert. And remember to use the link in the show notes to go to Amazon and check out Peter's acclaimed book, The Captivating Public Speaker.